Hello and welcome to another tutorial. So what we're going to be looking at this time around is setting up something called a game instance. So the idea behind this is having a single object that we know we can rely upon at any stage in the game is going to exist, and that's going to be there pretty much from the very beginning, the earliest point there possible of the game. And that allows us to do a number of things. So one of the things it allows us to do, because this is something that doesn't ever get destroyed until the game closes, that means that's a place where if we need information to carry across scenes and it doesn't make sense to save it out to file, that we can store it on that object. It means that if we need something as a central point for keeping track of, okay, are we in the main menu? Are we in the main game itself? We have something that can do that. So it gives us a really handy central point. Things like if settings, stuff like if that could also be stored on it, working with sort of save game information potentially. There's a lot of different uses for it. So that's what we're going to get set up today. So our first step is I'm going to set up the scene that is going to hold the object that is always going to be there. So getting this persistent object that always exists is going to be the initial focus. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new scene, and I'm going to call this our persistent level, because the idea is this is going to be a level that is always present and that we'll have access to. So in the build settings, I want to add stuff in here. So I'm going to, because I'm also going to have a main menu, so I'm going to create a scene for that while I'm at it. So I have a main menu, a main level, and the persistent level can really kind of go anywhere. The key thing is we wouldn't have it first. So it wouldn't be the first level we load, but apart from that it can be anywhere else in the order, because once that first level's loaded, we're generally handling everything manually ourselves. So okay, I've created that level. So let's go to set up our script. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a script that is called game instance. And then I'm going to load up the persistent level. Now the persistent level will start out with the defaults we normally get there of a camera and a directional light. What I'm going to do is create an empty, and I'll call it game instance. I will attach the game instance script to that, and then I'm going to delete these other ones. Now there might be other objects I end up adding in here. If I had stuff for settings, if I had stuff for potentially save load management, that could also go in here as well. But for now, I've got my game instance. So I'm going to save that, and I'll actually go back to the main, in this case I'll go back to the main menu. So, okay, let's edit this script. The first thing I want to get going is I want to get it so that I'm able to ensure that this game instance exists. So, okay, I need to make sure it exists, which means I need to forcibly load this level if it's not already present. So, okay, what I can do is a fairly effective way of doing this is I can have a function that hooks into the loading of things. So the way I do that is I use this runtime initialize on load method attribute. I indicate, and there are a bunch of different ones that we can use. In this case, I'm going to use before scene load, so it's going to run quite early in the process. And then I have a public static void load persistent level. Now, the naming of this function is entirely up to us. It does need to be static. The attribute is generally how it's being found. but it is important that we don't need to be too cautious about the name of it. So okay, we're going to have that. Now our object is also going to be a singleton. So I'm going to just briefly set up the logic for that as well. So I have game instance, and that publicly gettable, privately settable is null like that, and we need to make that as static. Then in awake, well, I can do instance is equal to this, but first, as I always want to make sure I do here, I want to check if instance is already set. Because if it's already set, that means that we've somehow added this script on multiple times, which is a problem. So what I'm going to do in that case is I'll do a return. I will destroy the game object that it's on, which is fairly heavy-handed, but that's kind of the point, is that I want it to be not failing quietly or silently, which is also why I'll do a log error, found duplicate game instance on, and then we can log out game object name. So this is quite a serious issue if it happens, so we just want to actually ensure that it doesn't get missed. So, okay, good so far. We'll make sure that level gets loaded. So first thing I need to do is check if our persistent level is already present. So I can check to see if the game instance exists, and if it doesn't, load the persistent level, which means I need to know the name of the persistent level. So if I need to know the name of the persistent level, I can just actually check against that name. So what I'm going to do is have a const string level name is persistent level. Now we can't set this up like this. We need to make sure we fix that up. Now, in terms of using it, I'm going to bring in our Unity engine, scene management, because what that will allow me to do is I can traverse all of the scenes. So scene index is 0, scene index is less than scene manager, scene count. Now that's the number of scenes that are present in the hierarchy. Then I can check that particular scene to see if it matches with the persistent level. So I can go, okay, well, scene manager, get scene at the index, and I can get the name of that. So if its name is equal to level name, then we just do return, because there's nothing further to do. The persistent level is already present. Otherwise, if we got to this point, that means that in none of the loaded levels are our persistent level. So we can do a scene manager load scene. We give it the level name, and then we want to load it additively. So we load it additively so that it gets layered on top, because that's how we want this to be working with it. And then important final thing we do is we go don't destroy on load for this instance. That will prevent this game instance being destroyed, being cleaned up. Now what I should see then is, so I haven't written any code in the main menu to load or create that game instance. But if I run this, what we should see is we can see persistent level is there, and very importantly, under don't destroy on load, we have our game instance. So that's good. Now I want to start to add in some additional things to this. So firstly, I'm going to just sort of wrap a bit of the boilerplate here using regions. So I do, when things start to get potentially a little bit messy like this, I will use regions just to help sort of clean it up, make it a little bit neater. I find works quite well. So I would generally refer to this as something like our instance management. So regions, you can set a name for it, and they have a begin and an end. And then the really handy thing, once they're set up, you can just collapse them. Then you see the title, and typically if you mouse over, you can see the content, but it just keeps it neater and cleaner. So now I could start to keep track of things like of our game phase. So public enum, and that's where we could have stuff, for example, unknown. Always good to have a specific thing as the first entry there for an enum potentially, just so that you can identify, oh, okay, this hasn't been properly set yet. So I have unknown. I have main menu and main level, because then I can keep track of the current phase. So we can have a game phase like that. Again, I'd make that publicly gettable, private set, and even though it will default to unknown, in this case I'm going to explicitly set it to the particular value. This is a habit that I'm still kind of intentionally actually in from working previously with C and C++, where in a lot of cases you can't assume that things will be initialized. So I've kind of intentionally retained that habit with when I write C# code, partly so that when I am working back in C++, I don't forget to initialize things, because that can cause a lot of problems. It's really sort of something where it's a good habit to actually be doing that. It doesn't often bite you in C#, but it can. So I do try and always be explicit with what those default values are for something. So, okay, we'll keep track of the phase. So I'm going to set up a couple of other scripts, because our main menu is going to need to talk to the game. So I just want to set up some super simple UI. So we're going to set up some very basic UI. So it's going to have a button to load the level. So I'm going to just reposition that so it's in the center. So not the width, that's fine. And there we go. So this is just going to be main level. So I'm going to create a script here. So we'll first create the object for it. So main menu manager. Then we create a script, main menu manager. And I will also have a game manager. So kind of the difference between a game instance and the game manager is the game manager exists while we are in the main level, but then not after. We go back to the main menu, we typically destroy the game manager. We go into the main level, we create a new manager there. So the instance is usually something that doesn't get destroyed at any point until we close the game. So just as a handy way of sort of working with it. So I'm going to add in our main menu manager. So add that script in. So apart from having public void on go to main level, or on start game, or on play game. Play game. That will do a Unity engine scene management. Scene manager, load scene, And we're going to load main level. So when we enter this main menu though, I want to tell the game instance. So game instance on enter main menu. So it can update the phase then, which is really handy. So we can have a public void on enter main menu, phase, it's game phase main menu. So that looks good. So far so good. We want to connect up the code in a moment. So we can see, we just need to make sure we save that. Very easy to miss unless you remember to hit the hotkey combination where it saves everything. So we're going to just wire up that button to the main menu manager. And that's going to do our on play game. So this should work. And I can see the game instance there. And just to sort of prove that it's, I'm going to move its location, going to hit main level. Its location hasn't changed. We still have our game instance here. So that's good. I want to have a similar thing for public void on enter level. So we can do our phase, game phase, main level. So then our game manager, which I'm going to bring up our main level and set it up. So we have our game manager. We'll link that up. So it in start is going to do quite similar to what we did with the main menu. So we've got something that's going to be saying where we're heading to, so the phase that we're switching to. So that would then allow this to initially, I'm just going to log out that phase, just so we can see that changing. Because what I expect to see is it indicates as we go into the main menu, indicates as we go into the main level. So we can see it said main level, which is good. If I go back to the main menu, then I should see main menu. And when I run or click on main level, I can see main menu and I get main level. So that's good. I've got those bits working quite nicely. What I am going to do, just as an easy way to copy stuff, is drag things. I've made sure I saved the main menu one. I'm going to drag these from main menu over. I go remove scene and I don't save the changes. That's an easy way of transferring stuff between scenes. And then I can quickly get the function set up for doing the various bits of logic here. So not in the game instance, in the game manager. So on turn to main menu. So this will just make it so that I can very easily be switching between all of these. So our button links up to this, links up to our game manager on return to main menu. So now what I'm expecting to be able to do is, as I click on any of these buttons, so I'm in the level, I go to the main menu, so I can be easily switching between all of these, which is great. We've got that ability to switch between them. And we have the object that's carrying over between them. So okay, we have got this infrastructure here, and that's working quite nicely. We have something where we can easily query the phase of the game if we need to, which is handy. let's start to do something a bit more with this, because we mentioned one of the main things for using with this was so that we could easily transfer information around and transfer stuff between scenes. So I'm going to go to the main menu and I'm going to set this up with a couple of extra buttons. So I'm going to have play, and we might have this be a short game. So play, default duration or default length. We're going to call that fast game. Default length. Play slow game. So what I want to do is indicate, okay, well, what type of game is being played. I'm going to, just because I'm going to have some enums that don't really fit in a particular setup, I'm going to have a script that I'm going to call game common. And what I'm going to do is we'll set up public enum e game mode, have fast, default, and slow. But I might actually order these so default is first, just because if I forget to initialize something, that'll mean it will go to default. Can get rid of the rest of this. And then in our main menu manager, I want to be able to go, okay, well, on play game default, and I want to have slow and fast. Now I haven't set up for being able to call this with the enum, because that is something that still currently does not work, unfortunately, in Unity by default, of being able to bind something with an enum parameter to an event. That's something that unfortunately is not possible. Although I have upgraded Unity versions, so on the off chance that maybe it is, we'll try this. E game mode. So we'll check, but I'm pretty sure that this is still not supported, but useful for us to check. So we can see it doesn't show up. So that is an unfortunate thing, that ones with enums you can't bind in the inspector. Now I will keep this around as a private function, because the rest of these can go, and what the rest of these will do is they will say, okay, well, on play game default, then on play game slow. So this is what I often end up doing as a way of working around the fact that it doesn't support enums, is I'll set up functions like this, and they'll all route to a common one. Now with this, I can then go, before I start playing, I will say, hey, game instance, set game mode. So I wouldn't directly change the variable. I would go through setting the via a function, just in case there was stuff where we wanted to do extra checks, where potentially changing from one mode to another, we might need to load in different resources. There might be different things we need to do. It gives us the sort of flexibility for doing that, which, yes, we could use property for doing that as well, but I would usually prefer to sort of set up a function for it. So we're going to have public void set game mode, and I will also keep track of that here. So I'll have a public egame mode, and pretty much the usual setup that we would have. Game mode default, but it will just go and say, okay, well, mode is equal to mode. There might be other logic we kick off. And then in the game manager, we could be checking that. So for now, I'm just going to output this and say starting game with mode, game instance mode. And that will be something that I can access. So in this case, I'm just having an enum carryover, but very, very easy to be able to do this with more complex data. So we don't really have a restriction on what types of data we can do this with. If you can store it on a script, it's going to work. So it could be vectors, could be all manner of different things. So now I need to space out these buttons here. So I am going to set up a panel, menu items, drag these under that, update the size of this. So we might set it like that, 200 by 300. And we'll add in the vertical layout group, let it control width, turn it off force expanding height, and add in our little bits of padding. There we go. And we could also middle center so that the stuff's like that. We'll update our text so we can easily tell fast game, default game, and a slow game. So what I expect to see is that I can click on a particular button, and then when it loads into the next scene, it's telling me what that mode is. So we'll select fast game. So we don't see anything yet, and that's because when we changed everything, we needed to rebind all of the functions. So that's something to watch for if you're updating sections of UI. It's very easy to invalidate things at times and potentially need to relink everything up, as I had to in this case. So now I select fast game, loads in, starting a game with mode fast. I can go back, default. So each one of these is working. So we've now got the ability to, we have a level with a bit of script on it that is always going to be present, that we can guarantee will always be there, and we can access it pretty early in the life cycle of things. We have a track phase, which at the moment we don't do much with that. But if you had stuff you specifically wanted to do in the main menu, different music, for example, you could be using this to kick that off. If you then you're loading into a level, we have an entry point with it for where it knows you're loading into a level, so it could start to set up stuff in terms of grabbing save games, things like of that. So we showed it with some very simple data, but there's not really a restriction on the data that we can store in it. The main thing to watch for is that data is always going to be present. So it is a constant background memory hit there that you have, but it is something where you can store more complex data. So we've got our game instance, which there can only be one of, which we enforce that there is only one of, and we've seen how we can store data on it, retrieve that in a basic sense, and nothing changes with that more complex data. It's just, you just write it and you store it in the game instance, and you can reliably assume that there will only be one of it. So dive in and experiment with it. These sort of things like the game instance is a good area to potentially add in things like save load systems, stuff like of that, maybe even analytics, things, all of those as well are potential candidates. But it's a good location for putting anything where you need it to run and you don't want it to be affected by something going away in a scene, that it basically starts there from the very beginning and it's present until the end of the game. So really useful, really handy thing to be able to work with. Thanks folks, hope you found the video interesting and helpful. If you have, chuck in a like and subscribe, it really helps out, it's really appreciated. If you got any questions, chuck those in below. If you are looking for the code for the project, the code is available up on GitHub. There is a link to that in the description. The code is freely available to use in any of your own projects, commercial or non-commercial ones. If you were trying to find similar or related videos or ones in a particular area, I do have a searchable video archive, and there is a link to that in the description below as well. And finally, if you're looking for other ways to support the channel, then I do have a Patreon, and there's a link to that in the description as well also. But until next time, bye!